Well, welcome back to Imperfect, the Heart-Centered Leadership Podcast. I'm really delighted because I asked one of my clients to come on the show because number one, she's heart-centered. Number two, she's making a huge impact on the world. And number three, I wanted you to get to know her as a person. So Diana, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Deb. It's such a pleasure to be here.
I would love for you to tell the listeners a little bit about who you are and what you do, because there's no way I could read your bio and give justice. So tell our listeners a little bit about you and your company.
Sure. I am, first, I'm a new mom of a baby who's 15 months old. And second, as Deb mentioned, I'm the co-founder of Nomi Network. We're an anti-trafficking organization focused on providing economic opportunities for survivors and women at risk of human trafficking. And I first came across the issue when I was a research fellow for a microfinance bank in Cambodia in 2007. And so as a graduate student at New York University, I was charged with researching and really looking at the impact of microfinance on clients that are at the time making anywhere from $1 to $3 a day. And so through my research, I discovered that most of these families were still living in poverty after receiving microfinance loans. And the tip of the iceberg was when a single father with 7 children offered my male colleague his youngest daughter after we surveyed him. You like her, you take her. And as I looked into his eyes, I could tell that he was desperate. They were all living under one straw hut with living off of about 75 cents a day. And so that is what led me to really dig deeper on the issue of human trafficking and what someone like me with the background in economics could do to solve for this problem.
It's such a beautiful story. And I remember when I first met you and I thought it's one of those serendipitous moments that you were literally at the right place at the right time and injected your heart-centered leadership. So my first leadership question is, we're going to add to that story and tell us the first chapter, how you came home from that trip, and tell us what was in your heart, what was your passion, and what you actually did in creating and co-founding Nomi.
Yeah. So when I came back, I couldn't forget the little girl that I saw, his daughter. She had long brown hair, big brown eyes, and I could tell she was confused. And I just could not shake off the image of her in my head. And so really my desire just really centered around her. And I, first of all, almost could put myself in her shoes. Although I'm not Cambodian, I'm Chinese American. I could see myself like, what if I were born in that village? What if I was living in abject poverty? What if I was, in this circumstance where my father was trying to sell me? And through that really drove me to do something. And so from that, came back to New York City, gathered my friends from Columbia University and New York University. And I was like, this is what I've discovered, in Cambodia. And, what could we do to fight this issue? And so I already had some thoughts in my head around economic opportunity. And then 2 other women came to the forefront. One, my co-founder, she just got back from South Africa. She was working with women living with HIV, and she happened to have a background in the fashion industry as a buyer for Saks Fifth Avenue. And then my second co-founder, she just really had a heart of gold and was willing to go with me to Cambodia the following summer to dig deeper into researching human trafficking. And we surveyed 12 anti-trafficking organizations. So I really leaned in on being a learner and learning from these organizations, what were the gaps? And across the board, whether they were rescuing girls out of brothels, whether they were providing shelter for women years at a time, because the recovery process can be a long journey for those that are formerly slaves, and whether or not they were then trying to create some economic opportunity, they really needed help in the reintegration and creating economic opportunity portion of their work. And so that's where Nomi came in, and we started working with a shelter that was exporting or trying to export tote bags. And so we were successful at not just helping them export the tote bags, but growing their workforce from 23 to 46 to 80 women that were employed making tote bags that we then exported to Walmart.com, Sephora. So we were able to really gain traction by creating jobs and really elevating their technical skills.
I love that. And I'm going to switch gears for 1 minute. So during this process and the growth of your own leadership and leaning into your heart leadership, my second question has permanent residency on the show. What imperfections does Diana bring to her heart-centered leadership?
That's a really great question. I would say that when I'm hyper-focused on something, sometimes I could have real tunnel vision, and it's almost like an obsession. So I was really obsessed with getting economic opportunity for this family so they wouldn't have to sell their children. And then that became larger scale. Now working with the shelter with 80 women, and then it became even larger scale. Now we're opening up a training facility in India. And so sometimes when I become laser focused, in the early years, I would say, although I'm a very relational person, and although I believe that I'm in many ways people first, I think I became really task oriented and task first. And so in the early stages, there were definitely a lot of hiccups with particularly, staff members not feeling appreciated as I was really driving more of the financial goals of the organization. Sometimes that was at the compromise of relationships.
And it's always a fun question to ask on the show. We have a lot of candor, we have a lot of humor, and people are like, how much time do we have? But it's always nice to reminisce and look back on our life and leadership journey to see how we're lifelong learners, we evolve. We're all a work in progress, aren't we?
Definitely, we are. Yeah.
So adding to the next chapter of that story, my third question is, fast forward now from 2007 to 2024. That's a significant amount of time. Tell us, what is your proudest moment of Nomi? And we'd love to know how the name was derived, by the way. But what are you most proudest of in terms of the impact that you've done collectively as an NGO?
That's a great question. I'll start with the name, genesis of our name. So I mentioned the second summer, my co-founder and I went to Cambodia, and one of the shelters we visited was in a province called Battambang. And in this shelter, when we walked in, there were over 100 girls as young as 5 years old who were trafficked. So some of the cases were just extreme and heartbreaking. So when we initially arrived at the center, we were expecting the girls to be in isolation and just not very interactive. And that was the case for most of the girls. But right when we walked in, we were greeted by a girl who at the time was near 8 years old. She ran to us, gave us hugs, and kind of diverted us to her rabbit. She had a rabbit that she held as a pet. She wanted to show us her rabbit. And so her name is actually Naomi. And we just really fell in love with her. And we felt that women and girls like Nomi, their past should not dictate their future. And so her name just kept on coming about. And we thought to ourselves, as I was riding the bus out of that village, I was thinking, Nomi, is synonymous in my head for know me, know me. And then kind of iteratively, we thought, know my story, know my success. And she represents now thousands of girls that we've served, that we believe that they have the opportunity. And when we invest in women and girls like Nomi, that we'll see the ripple effects in our communities, and we'll see just really the sky's the limit for them, for the little investment that we've made in their lives.
I love that. And what's the biggest impact you've had? It's been 17 years.
Yeah, I would say I am just really brought back to, I would say, the third year being in India when I was conducting some visits, home visits. There were women that were showing us their savings books, and their savings were increasing. There were women that were showing us the school uniform that they had proudly bought their daughters. And prior to our program, their daughters were not even in school. They were pulled out of school. In some of these communities, girls sadly are not given education, and they're pulled out at the third grade level, sometimes even younger. And so those are one of many stories. And now, like, fast forward, I'm, I don't know every client by name, but I know that over the past decade, we've impacted over 19,000 women and girls through our economic opportunity program. And I always, whenever I visit these communities in India and Cambodia, I'm really proud of women like Selah in Cambodia, who was able to, through increasing her agriculture productivity through Nomi Network, now providing for her family. And also her husband is now not forced to migrate to Thailand. There's a lot of cross-border trafficking between Thailand and Cambodia because there's lack of job opportunities in Cambodia. So not just are we impacting the lives of women and girls, but also really families and keeping families together and really helping these communities thrive. Communities that typically are at high vulnerabilities of individuals being taken or trafficked.
And my last question is more of an educational one for the listeners, because we are in 65 countries and we don't take that lightly. Share with us some data, if you will, of how you decided to go into the countries that you are serving and how you kind of came full circle with that. And then from an educational standpoint, as a general listener, what are the biggest countries or the top 3 countries where anti-trafficking is really a big problem today, present day?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So there's a index called the Global Slavery Index. And according to that, countries with the highest prevalence are North Korea and Eritrea. And these countries, they have a ranking and really rich data. So I encourage listeners to tap into that to see where your country fares along that scale. In terms of Cambodia, we first selected Cambodia because back in 2007, Cambodia was still very much post-genocide. And so there's, in Cambodia alone, there were about 300 anti-trafficking organizations from France, from Australia, from the US. And the reason they were there because there was a high need. And not only was Cambodia a destination for sex tourism, it was also a transit country where individuals were being transported to other countries and trafficked. And also it was a source country, meaning individuals are sourced to go to Thailand, to go to other countries and be trafficked as well. So that's why we chose Cambodia, because of the cute nature and because of the fact that they were really still recovering. So economically, there were no opportunities other than, sadly, brothels. And it was very apparent. You could drive from the airport to your hotel and pass by like 10 brothels where you could clearly see underage children being trafficked. So this was back in 2007, just the cute nature of it. And we chose India. We were encouraged to go to India because of the high number of people who are enslaved. So India has a population of about 1.2 billion people, although it's not the most prevalent. There are about 20 million people in slavery today out of the global figures of nearly 50 million. So nearly half the world's population of those who are trafficked are estimated to be in India. So that's why we chose India. And currently we have 20 sites in 4 different states in northern India. And we continue to see the needs grow because of not just the number of people in trafficking, but the different forms of trafficking, labor trafficking, even organ trafficking, domestic servitude because of various levels of caste system. So there's a lot of different factors that are in play in these rural communities in India that keep people in generational poverty and generational slavery.
And I want to add one more question in more about Nomi, because it was something I found really admirable about your leadership and your culture within Nomi. You choose to have a week of no meetings for you and your staff. Explain how that kind of came to fruition and what it's given back to you and your culture at large. And really, why did you decide to do it? Because it's brilliant.
Yeah, I really believe in order to look outwards, we also must look inward. And a lot of times, you know, as leaders, especially high capacity, our schedules could be booked to the second. And we know that's true for many of the leaders in Nomi Network as we work with external stakeholders like donors, our clients, our partners, government institutions. So there's 10 different stakeholders that we work with on an ongoing basis. So this is a week where individuals from Nomi can focus more on their goals and really lean into being reflective. So reflecting on not just what was achieved, but perhaps failures, reflecting on failures and what didn't work, and thinking around bringing in articles, bringing in learnings and just really other schools of thought into not just goal setting, but also accomplishing their goals. So we believe that having that week of focused time really accelerates some of the things that are less urgent but critical, because a lot of times we focus as human nature on critical things that need our attention, but those catalytic moments or decisions, maybe you will think of an idea that will help Nomi Network train, instead of thousands of women, hundreds of thousands of women. But we really need that mental space and bandwidth to think through strategically on our goals.
Absolutely. It's brilliant. Okay, I'm going to switch to my Fab Four. These are just four fun questions. We don't want you to think. We want to know what's on the top of that brilliant mind of yours. So, first question, what's one practical tip you'd give our listeners today for embracing heart-centered leadership into their daily lives?
I would say is in the morning, just really, instead of jumping in on your email or being responsive, just taking, even if it's just 10 minutes to pause. For me, I tend to listen to some worship music, light music, just so that I'm being still, being in a posture of rest before I start my day.
It's managing that inner leader. I love it. Okay, number two, if your leadership style had a theme song, what would it be?
It's a great question. Ain't No Mountain High Enough.
That's a good one. I love that one. That's just hearing the title of that song. I could hear it in my mind now, ready to break into a dance. And you know what? That is who you are. And look at what you've done since 2007. So I'm going to align with you on that. Okay, question 3. What would you summarize as the key takeaway or lesson from our discussion today?
Yeah, for me, I feel like I've been thinking a lot, and this ties in as you're asking me questions about the past, or a lot of the past is coming up, that as a leader, I'm really double clicking into looking into the past before I can look into the next 5 years of Nomi. We're getting ready to embark on setting the next 5 years. And so even having this discussion with you today is just bringing back memories of clients, of team members, board members, stakeholders, that just is putting me in a more posture of being reflective as we look into the future. So I think great leaders from presidents, they always look at history and what's been done so that they don't repeat the same mistakes. But at the same time, I think for me, it's really encouraging to look back as well.
Yeah, and it's okay to look in the rearview mirror if you're reminiscing and seeing what you've done, what you've overcome, the barriers, all the things we've talked about. I think it has a foundational place in your next strategic plan, because we can't keep growing and anchoring to the present moment and looking ahead if we can't sit and celebrate and reminisce on how we got to where we are today.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So before I give you the last question, I have to give a shout out to Neil Grunberg, because he introduced us and put us together. And it's just been phenomenal working with you and seeing all the great strides, but not afraid to lean in. And you have such a limitless level of self-awareness, and you continue to grow that. And I think managing that inner leader is always going to be a proponent to greatness, especially heart-centered leadership. And even Nomi as a whole, and hearing the name and where that brings you back to, it's so heart-centered. And I'm glad you landed in that space, because you took that idea from that vision that landed in your heart and you acted on it, and look what you've done. And I just think of all the women you've helped and all the women you're going to continue to help. And it's just, I'm in awe to know you. And I wish you all the best for the future. I think there's still great things to come, and I'll be happy to sit on the sidelines and watch you soar those mountains.
Thank you so much. You've been such an incredible sounding board and coach. And I feel like I feel just in terms of even more confident after my coaching with you, just as I embark on the growth stage of Nomi. So thank you.
It's going to be fun to see where you're going to go. It's going to be fun to be along for the ride. So, and thank you for reading my book, and thank you for your kind comments, by the way. And I'm going to ask you to finish this session with finishing this sentence. Heart-centered leadership is
self-care. This is the moment that you're catching me in. As I mentioned earlier, I'm a new mom. And so I would say caring for self means being more able to care for others and care especially for our clients well.